Well, welcome to the evening of the 14th. It's been a busy day for me. I've been doing a bunch of yard work, which is a little bit different, but the previous days have been really windy and rainy, so I guess it was a bit of an improvement. I wanted to catch up with some Christian news and also to touch up on some of the cultural things that are going on. On the news front, the United Methodist Church on May the 3rd voted to change their book of discipline so that they are fully LGBTQ plus affirming, joining the PCUSA, the Episcopal Church, the Disciples of Christ, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, and the United Church of Christ. So that was a major movement. Um, when they came to the end of their assembly, they passed that measure with no debate and with no opposition virtually, because prior to that, all of the conservative denominations and the conservative people had left the denomination, recognizing that it was very unlikely that there was going to be any resolution to the problem. Now, this leads into a slightly larger cultural issue, which was discussed at length in a book by John S. Dickerson. The book was The Great Evangelical Regress, 6 Things That Will Crash the American Church and How to Prepare It. That book came out in 2013, and he had predicted that our secular culture was going to rapidly become hostile to any groups that failed to conform to secular mores. That prediction has very much been borne out. In response to the pressure, some groups, like the United Methodist Church, have chosen to concede and to adopt the secular mores rather than remaining faithful to Scripture, and other groups have decided to continue to be biblical in their orientation and to reject the cultural mores. The news media and those of the cultural elite have decided to apply pressure to the evangelical church and to conservative Christians in order to persuade them that they are wrong in their approach to this. And that is not particularly surprising because a number of the large platforms out there routinely are hostile to conservative and evangelical Christians, and some even frequently present apologetics for secularists meant to move people away from the possibility of faith. The other day I was looking at one news feed, and there were 2 different articles on why you should not be a Christian in this day and age. Their goal, I think, is to reduce the credibility of conservative Christians and to paint evangelicals and conservatives with a brush that says that they are essentially bad people, evil, much like the KKK. And if that perception sticks, then people will not be tempted to respond to any evangelism that is going on. So you would say, well, that's an interesting approach. How is it working? Well, it seems to be working pretty well, actually. Um, Within our culture, things which Christians would view as evil are now routinely called good in the culture, and things that we would consider to be good are routinely said to be evil. So that is quite a cultural turnaround. Um, Evangelicals are still popular, but only if you speak to evangelicals. If you speak to anybody else, it's not. They're not considered favorably at all. Um, we are a little bit higher on the totem pole than Mormons, and a little bit higher than Islam, but not much. So by and large, their efforts are being fairly successful in painting a dire picture about the current evangelical crop. Um, Barna tells us that in our culture, we have gone from 6% to 4% of the population of the United States having a biblically based view of Christianity. That's not very many people in the grand scheme of things. And another author who recently did a study, Ryan Burge, determined that evangelicals are no longer evangelizing. And in fact, our numbers indicate that there are far fewer Christian evangelicals than there have been, and that the numbers are not increasing. There are more old evangelicals than new evangelicals coming on board. So we're running into a fairly difficult time here. And I think that we need to pause and kind of think about that and assess it and see what it says to us. One of the things that we might want to be aware of is that things aren't as rosy as they used to be, and most of us never thought that we would be living in a culture where we are viewed as the bad guys. That's really quite a turnaround. So what is the answer to that? And I guess I've got a couple of suggestions. One is, I think we should look at American history for just a little bit, or American church history. In the year 1795, colleges had become very, very irreligious. They were filled with, quote, infidels and skeptics. Morals were low, and in general, the church was doing very poorly. Very few people were going to church, and there were church leaders who thought that perhaps very quickly Christianity was going to cease to exist, and there was probably beyond being able to be revived. But in 1795, there was indeed the beginning of a great revival, the Second Great Awakening, and that situation was turned about completely. One of the things that seemed to make a difference happened at Yale, where the new president, President Dwight, began to teach the students theology, and he began to implement a program so that all the students would have read the scriptures, thoroughly read the scriptures, by the time that they graduated from college. So I think we can take a couple of things away from that, because much of even the evangelical church or the conservative church does not have much in the way of depth when it comes to the scriptures. So we need to be encouraging people to read their Bibles, to think about what's in them, and to begin to ask hard questions. There's absolutely nothing wrong with asking if the Bible is true, or whether or not it is a better viewpoint than what the atheists have. We need to know that what we believe is true, and we need to be able to defend it if it is true. So intellectually, we need to be familiar with our Bibles, and we need to be familiar with our theology. And we can do that. We encourage people to do that. And that may go a long ways towards making things a bit better, at least. I don't know for sure that there's going to be another revival soon in this nation. I'd like to see that. And perhaps as we raise people's interest and as we talk to people and share, we might see that. But if we don't see that, what I do know is that we are going to continue to be followers of Christ, whether the culture is favorable to us or not favorable to us. In fact, what we will do is we will follow that great teaching from Habakkuk 3:17, which says, "Though the fig tree does not blossom and no fruit is on the vines, though the produce of the olive fails and the fields yield no food, though the flock is cut off from the fold and there is no herd in the stalls, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will exult in the God of my salvation." So there's no reason to be discouraged. There's no reason to lose hope. Either there will be a revival and God will move wondrously in this land, and once again, faith will be restored, or God will judge the nation. And certainly as a nation, we certainly need judgment. America has a long history of not being God's people. So, whichever way it turns out, have faith, trust God, and continue to be loyal as you're following Christ.